Has the European Union caved in just once too often for its own good? Poland and Hungary were accused of condoning corruption and abandoning what's been called the rule of law. Now, to get its massive budget approved by all 27 countries, has the EU effectively said, that's okay? The two supposedly rogue nations blocked the release of 1.8 trillion euros after being told to change their ways. Now the financial deal is going through, so what, if anything, has changed? This is Roundtable. Hello and a warm welcome from me, David Foster. One of our guests today will tell us that the European Union is being destroyed from the inside. Our question is this: has the bloc just pushed to one side a problem that could threaten its very existence? The EU's COVID-19 recovery fund caused controversy amongst some member states. For the first time, access to the money was linked to respecting the rule of law. Members agreed to a $900 billion financial package. It was blocked when Hungary and Poland initially vetoed the fund. They've been under EU investigation in the past for undermining the independence of courts and media in their countries, standing accused of not following core European Union values. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel eventually helped to strike a deal with the two countries, but critics are worried that December's agreement has not ended the arguments. Are these political divisions a threat to the future of the EU as we know it? Well, I'm very pleased to be able to welcome to this edition of Roundtable Laurent Pech, who's a professor of European law at Middlesex University, that's in London. We go to Budapest in Hungary and say hello to Katalin Cseh, who's a Hungarian member of the European Parliament. And then we go to Warsaw in Poland and welcome Marek Tatala, Vice President at the Civil Development Forum. Great to have you all on. And I know, and I should say this at the beginning, that you all hold views that what Poland and Hungary are doing is not necessarily right. We'll go into that in some detail. But Laurent, let me start with you first of all. Is this a form of blackmail with both Poland and Hungary saying to the European Union, we won't let you have the money unless you ignore what we're doing?
And the short answer is no, this is not blackmail. This is just reminding these two governments of the conditions they have agreed to when they actually joined the EU. Long story short, essentially, when you want to become a member of the EU, you have to undertake a number of legal commitments, one of which is a commitment to respecting and promoting the rule of law. So you cannot really make the case that you can violate the rule of law and yet get at the same time EU taxpayers' money, which without the rule of law, obviously, you can misuse, if not steal just straight away. So this is not blackmail. What is blackmail, by contrast, is in fact refusing to agree to the EU budget in order to be able to escape from EU obligations. This is blackmailing to the extent that you're preventing your neighbors from accessing essentially EU money to fight COVID-19, for instance. That's what is blackmail, in my view.
I suppose in a sense that's what I was suggesting. Perhaps it was lost in the translation. I was saying, are Poland and Hungary blackmailing the European Union? I think your answer is sort of yes. And what do they get out of it?
So, I mean, we had a big fight essentially about whether the Hungarian and British government would agree to the budget unless the EU would drop this new mechanism. So this is rather difficult to quickly explain, but for the first time, the EU has given itself a new mechanism to suspend EU money in case a member state is violating the rule of law in a systemic way. So this is the first time this mechanism has been adopted. The problem to get an agreement on this, essentially, was decided not to apply this mechanism for quite a number of months until essentially we get a judgment from the Court of Justice on this new mechanism. So that was the kind of a so-called compromise which Merkel brokered with the Polish and Hungarian prime ministers.
Okay, so they can do pretty much what they like with the EU saying, well, we will have a mechanism to investigate your abuses, but that could take some time. So, Marek, let me ask you, does this mean the system is under threat. The system of the rule of law within the European Union, a system upon which the entire bloc is based.
Firstly, what the EU is doing, it's not only in the interest of Poland, and I agree that Poland should have the system based on the rule of law, but it's also in the interest of the rule of law in the European Union and survival of the European Union as the club of countries that share similar values. And Poland accepted voluntarily to join the EU, and it is why we should also stick to the values of the club. As Professor Pech mentioned, the EU rule of law mechanism connected with the funds is discussed now and was discussed recently, but challenges to the rule of law in Poland started in late 2015. And I think the problem is even more older in Hungary with what Viktor Orban's government was doing. So this is a long-term challenge that Poland is facing. We still have at least 3 years of this government. And I think the EU should also think about this problem in a long-term perspective, about the survival of the EU as the club of countries that accept similar values, including the rule of law.
Well, this sort of echoes what Robert Cooper, used to be a senior EU policy official, had to say. It's something like it's a potentially fatal problem. In the long run, this is a community of law after all. So what are the dangers of ignoring the law? Let me come to you, Katalin, on that one. What are the dangers do you see in this?
Well, thank you for the question. And I'm so glad that this issue is gaining visibility, because frankly, democratic backsliding is not only a Polish or Hungarian problem, but a problem in the bloc in general. And what the problems could be is basically that the EU ends up in the situation in what we have in Hungary, that the European Union subsidizes large-scale corruption and the dismantlement of the checks and balances by the money of EU taxpayers. So far, the EU has turned a blind eye on the systemic challenges our country has developed under Mr. Viktor Orban's government. And I do believe that in case this new mechanism is not applied correctly, not only the issues will worsen within Hungary, but this will spread like a contagious disease, because other EU member states will see that the EU is incapable of acting, of striking down on those governments who violate the basic principles of the European Union. And
Katalin, you
risk the integrity
of
our
a number
community.
of other countries. Can you be a bit more specific? You mentioned other countries besides Poland and Hungary. Which ones did you have in mind?
Of course, I would suggest you to take a long, hard look on Slovenia, for instance, on Bulgaria. If in Italy, the elections do not go the right way, we also saw significant challenges there as well when Mr. Salvini was in government. So this is not an isolated Hungarian problem. And the EU should have a general answer for these challenges.
Okay, and as an opponent of what is happening in Hungary, as a member of the European Parliament who speaks out, and you've said things like no more EU money for rule breakers, EU funds end up with a spouse of a Fidesz politician, and that is the ruling party. What sort of reception are you getting in your home country?
Well, I believe that in general, for quite a lot of Hungarians, corruption is something they witness around them day by day. And there is a widespread support from the local municipalities, from the small businesses, from the people on the street, for everybody who speaks out and challenges the large-scale corruption that has taken over our country over the past decade. Of course, the government is not fond of what we are doing, but I'm not in the European Parliament to please them. On the contrary, to fight against the regime they constructed and with which they attempt to sink our country back to the past times that
I know you're not there as a popularity contest. You're not there just to make people happy. But I mean, are you under any kind of pressure back home from the authorities?
In Hungary, we have arrived to a point when it's very, very common for opposition politicians like me to receive death threats day by day, to receive comments that people wish me bodily harm on me or my family. But, you know, I think the real response is not this. but all the love and support we get from those who finally feel represented. And our party is growing in popularity, and our work is effective. So this is really worth the personal challenges I'm facing.
Laurent, can you explain to our viewers why the European Union, and principally Germany in this instant, felt it was necessary for it to cave in to Poland and Hungary, not just to get the financial package through, but perhaps for their own individual economic reasons?
I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I cannot really go into the economic side of rule of law backsliding. What I can tell you, however, I think last December, essentially, there was a kind of a legacy issue for Merkel. Merkel really wanted to end the German presidency of the Council of the EU on a high note. And she thought that the best way to end on a high note was to compromise, possibly, in my view, too much with the autocratic governments of Poland and Hungary. However, it is true that the bottom line is that you cannot adopt a budget if you don't have unanimity among the governments. I would say that there were ways around this unanimity requirement, but in the end, Merkel, the German government, went for a compromise consisting of not applying this new mechanism until essentially, most likely, another 1 or 2 years. So this is more time given to those stealing, misusing EU funds to essentially consolidate the autocratic regimes. So I think the answer to your question is that the short-term motivation was to end on a high note the German presidency of the Council, but obviously, as you said, there may be some economic aspects connected to the fact that the German government, especially under Merkel, has been quite lenient, especially when it comes to the destruction of checks and balances in Hungary, possibly because of the lobbying of the German car manufacturers.
Yeah, this is one thing I was going to bring up. There's a guy called Matthew Koenigsnick who writes for Politico. He had this to say: since the fall of the Berlin Wall, German industries transformed Central Europe into its shop floor, investing more than 30 billion euros in Poland alone. The region's become an integral part of the manufacturing base. And I say that also having found out that Austria is the third largest investor in Hungary. For pragmatic, nationalistic reasons, it does not sit well with these countries to come down hard on Poland and Hungary. So what they're actually saying when they condemn the fact that they're ignoring the rule of your law is simple window dressing, hypocrisy, if you like, Katalin.
Well, I do believe that it should be of the well-realized interests of these companies as well to champion a stable and foreseeable legal and economic framework in the country, because even though now they are in the favor of the governing party, we saw that business environments in Hungary change day by day just by the snap of the finger of somebody who is an influential oligarch of close to Mr. Orban. So I would say that in spite of the very recent challenges on certain multinational companies, it should serve the German car industry well to support the rule of law in Hungary, because rule of law gives stability and also sustainability to every industry that functions within the community.
Marek, let me come to you. Comment on what you've just heard, please, by all means. But I want to ask you if this is just, in a sense, history repeating itself. And I'm going back to the time when countries such as Greece were told that they had to get their budget in order to be a proper member of the European Union, and they were then accepted in. And of course, they were in a terrible mess. That was ignored for the sake of what was described as European unity, in fact, in enlargement. And the same thing is going on now. We must keep this bloc going at any cost.
I will start with answering the economic question, because I am the economist, and I think that it should be seen as the system of mutual benefits, the EU, the European Union, and the single market. And of course, German industry is a beneficiary of entering Polish market, but Germany is also the largest market for Polish exporters. So it is the system of mutual benefits. And we did analysis showing that, of course, EU funds are important for infrastructure investments, for growth of for building better infrastructure that works good for business. But what matters the most for Poland is the single market and our presence in the single market. While being at the margins of the EU decision making enables some countries in the EU to weaken the single market, to promote intra-EU protectionism. And this whole battle about on the rule of law is detrimental for our national interests regarding presence at the single market, because the government has to fight the battles with Brussels regarding the independence of judiciary and cannot focus on this intra-EU protectionism. So economy matters here. And one more thing about the economy, rule of law is one of the fundamental thing for the economic growth, and it matters for local and foreign investors. So they want stable rules and stable institutional situation, and we have experienced fall in investments in relation to GDP in Poland in the recent years, and I think the attacks on the rule of law are one of the explanation of this deterioration in investment.
Yeah, we were hearing from Katalin about Fidesz politicians, corruption, etc., that is alleged in that country. In Poland, give us an example or two, if you would, of where you think the rule of law has been abused.
I think the biggest problem is the independence of judiciary and attempts to harass judges and other people who try to speak loudly about the rule of law situation in Poland. So we have new disciplinary system that enables the government officials to punish judges who speak loudly about the rule of law and the European values. And I think this is the biggest challenge, the first thing that should be resolved at the domestic level, but it should be also priority for the EU institutions to focus on restoration of the independence of judiciary in Poland after many policies that weakened this system of judicial independence in our country.
Okay, this is a question for all three of you, but I'm going to throw it first of all at you, Laurent. Do you believe that this so fundamentally weakens the European Union as an institution that it is in existential danger in the long run?
I would have to agree with this diagnosis, because I was one of the first scholars to actually make it as soon as 2016 in the case of Poland. The EU is very much a community based on laws, and there has never been a strong need to really enforce the law, because the law was complied with, if only because only law-abiding countries could join the EU to begin with. This system is being tested to the limit in light of what has been happening, starting with the situation in Hungary in 2010. When you have a system with relatively weak enforcement tools and based on mutual trust, then you test the system to its limit when dealing with essentially people who know exactly what they're doing, who have the will to break the system, to steal with impunity, and punishing their own judges and prosecutors whenever they are being found out. In the absence of direct enforcement bodies, the EU is quite weak. That being said, the EU does have quite a few tools to at least contain the problems. In my view, the EU has essentially failed to do so. First of all, because he has failed to understand for a long time what was happening on the ground. And then there has been a lack of a will of political courage, in my view, for many different reasons. But the fact that we're actually discussing the topic today gives me hope for the future, to the extent that the topic has never been in so much public discussion as this year. So possibly for the first time now there is a wide understanding that we're facing a real pressing, if not existential issue as far as the EU is concerned. So possibly we're going to finally see some meaningful actions coming from the EU, but also from national governments.
Katalin, it was only last November, a little more than 2 months ago, that you were hailing, as it was written down here, no more money for EU rule breakers. We hail the groundbreaking agreement on the rule of law, and yet less than a month after that, the disagreements were pushed to one side. What hope do you have of the future for an institution such as the European Union if it can turn a blind eye to these infringements?
I wouldn't say that the EU turned a blind eye on the infringements. On the contrary, I think that this mechanism, although it's not as strong or not as powerful as we would have wanted from the parliament, this is indeed a groundbreaking mechanism and a unique tool for the EU to sanction rule breakers. Now, and what my hope is, you ask.
But my point is that they're not going to start sanctioning countries such as Poland and Hungary because it's not in the European Union's short-term interest, perhaps in terms of its existence down the way, but not in terms of what happens tomorrow.
But I have to argue with you on this. Of course, Poland and Hungary can turn to the European Court to challenge this law. This is within their powers. It has been within their powers as members of the Union. However, and as it was confirmed by Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament, also Vera Jourova, Commissioner, the problematic cases will be looked on starting January 1st. And the court case will last probably for 4 months, 6 months. If it drags on, the Parliament can request an expedited procedure. So maybe the court challenges and the application of the process will start a bit later. But those cases where money was stolen starting January 1st, it can be scrutinized. And this is a breakthrough.
Well, yes, it's like all those promises at donor conference, isn't it? You know, we will give 1 billion, but when it comes to asking somebody to write the check, it very often doesn't happen. They may begin a process, but will it result in anything meaningful being done to either Hungary or Poland or any other infringers?
Well, this is our responsibility in the European Parliament to scrutinize these institutions and push them to actually apply this mechanism, use their powers, because the problem so far has been that the EU had powers but was very timid to use that. For instance, funding was stopped from Polish cities that declared themselves as LGBTQ free zones just a few months ago, but this instrument has existed for much longer. So the question is, why is the Commission not brave enough? And we in the Parliament, we will do everything within our powers to push the Commission to take action.
Marek, was it not inevitable that it would come to this? Because the 1.7 trillion euros was desperately needed over a number of years, and without acquiescing to some extent to Poland and Hungary, the money would not have got to those who most needed. It was simple pragmatism.
I agree that there was a level of pragmatism in decision that was connected with the rule of law mechanism, but we should remember that there are also other tools, and these tools should be used by the European Commission, including more infringement procedures regarding violation of the independence of judiciary at various levels of Polish courts, including also the Constitutional Tribunal. And these tools were ready before the EU rule of law mechanism, and they are ready now. They can be used, and I think the pressure of the European public opinion, civil society should be stronger on the EU institutions to utilize what they have in their toolbox.
Okay, so other countries, you suggest, Katalin, may well take advantage of this. It's been suggested also on this program that the very integrity of the European Union is at stake. If this continues, quick one for you, Laurent, if I may, how long can the bloc continue?
What we're seeing is a slow car crash, essentially, when it comes to the rule of law. So the visible impact of a rule of law backsliding is not that obvious. However, you can see some signs of increasing division, politically speaking, and also more and more national courts essentially raising serious questions about the principle of mutual recognition of foreign judgments. So there are plenty of important cases, for instance, regarding involving Dutch courts, starting to question whether they should, in fact, what should they enforce, recognize decisions from Polish courts, considering the fact that Polish judges are under unlawful pressure not to comply, not to apply EU law requirements. Politically speaking, in addition to this legal dimension, at some point, European taxpayers in a number of European countries are going to start questioning EU membership if they see that the EU is not reacting to widespread industrial scale misuse of EU money. So it's not simply the functioning of the EU legal system, which is becoming increasingly under stress. I think politically the legitimacy of the EU will also become more and more discussed, if not challenged, if European taxpayers essentially start viewing the EU as a source of essentially of fraudulent use of their own hard-earned taxes.
Wow, that is some warning. And from all three of you, thank you very much indeed. I did say 1.7 trillion. It's 1.8 trillion, but what is a mere 100 billion euros when you've got the problems that the European Union has to have? It has got the money now, but was it a price worth paying? Listen, thank you very much indeed for coming on this edition of Roundtable. And I'd like to thank you, wherever you are watching this program, for your company. We hope to have you with us on another occasion. Until then, from me, David Foster, and the team, goodbye.